Hello, Janesville, and welcome back to Park Place Views, the monthly program that aims to keep residents informed by highlighting the people, places, and partners of the City of Janesville. As always, this program is brought to you by the City of Janesville and JATV Media Services. I'm your host, Nick Faust, and I'm the assistant to the City Manager in the City Manager's office. Now, in last month's episode, I sat down with Shelley Slapak, the city's Recreation Director. With fall time here in Wisconsin's Park Place, I was excited to have Director Slapak here with us to help us learn more about all the fantastic events and programs she has planned for the fall and winter months ahead. If you're interested in watching that show or any past episode of the program, they're all available to watch on demand on the city's website or JATV's YouTube page. Today I'm looking forward to being joined by Dave Godek, the city's Finance Director. As the city works through its annual budget process, I'm excited to have Director Godek here to help us learn more about the city's budgetary endeavors and cover all things city finance. Dave was hired by the City of Janesville in November of 2007 as the Deputy Clerk Treasurer. In June of 2015, he was promoted to City Clerk Treasurer, and in May 2021, he was promoted to Finance Director after serving in that role on an interim basis for 4 months. Before working at the city, Director Godek worked as an auditor at Wipfli LLP, and he's received his undergraduate at Bradley University in Political Science and Psychology, and his master's at UW-Whitewater in Accounting. Thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Before we get started, I know I ran down the laundry list, but I thought I might give you a chance to tell the viewers a little more about yourself.
Oh, sure. Name's Dave Godek, was actually raised out east, came out to the Midwest for college, and fell in love with the Midwest. Met my wife at Bradley. We moved to Wisconsin. We've been here for 22 years. We live here in the city of Janesville with our family. Find Wisconsin in general and Janesville in particular to be a great place to live and raise our family, and just really enjoy it here.
Yeah, certainly agree, a great place. And folks, I will let you know, I'll warn you that Dave is an Eagles fan, but we won't hold that against him on the program today. But still some vestiges of being from out east.
They are 7-1.
Yeah, and we won't get into Packers talk. But Dave, at the end of this month, the city's 2024 budget will be adopted by the City Council, and that really marks the end of what is months and months of work that perhaps folks don't totally understand that timeline. Could you give us an overview of the city's budget process?
Sure. Really, internally, the budget process starts in the finance office in May. We start coming up with macro projections of where we think we're going to be for the current fiscal year as far as revenues and expenditures. And then also what we project our revenues and expenditures for 2024 to be. Based on that information, we start creating parameters for building the budget. Provide that information specifically to city administration so that the city manager in particular can provide guidelines to the department, division, and office heads on how he wants the budgets that those division, department, and office heads create to be submitted and what rules he'd like them to follow. We're looking at things like state aid estimates, property tax estimates. On the revenue side, we do an annual fee review to look at our fees to make sure that they're recovering the costs of the services that are provided. What a lot of folks don't realize is that by law we can only charge the recovery for a fee.
Yeah.
We can't make a profit on that. So we've got to look and make sure that our costs are being recovered when we have a fee that's related to something that doesn't generally benefit the general public. It's specific to an individual, something like a building permit.
Yeah.
From there, we create refinements to that macro projection, meet with the City Council at the beginning of August to get their direction on what's important to them, what their parameters for the creation of a budget are. The city manager then meets with all the department, division, and office heads, shares what the City Council wants, how the city manager wants those policies implemented. we work through August and September on individual budgets.
Yeah.
And then at the beginning of October, we put it all together in a budget book that we present to the city council, which becomes the city budget that is proposed by the city manager to the city council. At that point, the city council has the opportunity to review the budget, to ask questions about the proposed budget, and most importantly, submit amendments to the proposed budget. And then it becomes the city council's budget.
Yeah.
And that'll be the budget that they adopt at the end of November.
Wow. So really a comprehensive timeline that not a lot of downtime in between when we adopt that, or the council I should say adopts that budget, it becomes theirs, and then you get into late spring of next year, you're already laying the groundwork for what will be the 2025 budget.
That is correct.
Yeah, and doing all that good work, bringing the budget together, working hand in hand with departments, divisions, and offices who kind of rely on you and your team as subject matter experts when it comes to budgeting. Just how many staff members are in your office and what are their roles?
Well, we've got, including myself, 8 people in the finance office. And really the finance office is kind of split between 2 separate and distinct sort of roles. There's the accounting piece. That would take care of things like the budget, the annual comprehensive financial report, the audit, the note issue. And there we've got an accounting manager, a senior accountant, and an accountant. On the flip side of that, we've got 2 individuals that do payroll for the city, 1 individual that does accounts payable, and then a 4th individual that dabbles in a little bit of everything. As sort of our utility infielder and helps out where she's needed. Has a lot of responsibility for our insurance programs as we're mostly self-insured.
Yeah, and I think that's important to kind of highlight the roles of your team in your office there, because for a municipality our size, you have quite lean staffing, I would say. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's going out on a limb. I would say you folks are pretty lean when it comes to just what you get done and your responsibilities.
Yeah, and I would say that that's pretty indicative of most of the offices, departments, and divisions within the city. We would certainly not turn down some extra staff if they were made available, but right now finances don't allow for that. And so, we get a lot done. We've got a productive group, and I'm proud of the hard work that they do. Certainly.
And I know we'll get into some of those underpinnings of kind of the fiscal realities for municipalities in Wisconsin. But foremost then, Dave, when we're talking about the money, how does the city determine spending priorities? I know you talked about budget parameters. What do those processes look like?
Well, really, the budget's a policy document. It's a document that tells anybody who reads it what are the priorities of the city, what are the priorities of our residents as established by the city council and then put into place by the administration. So what the budget does is it says where we're going to spend our money. That's what's important to us as a community. So as you look at that, there's really the city council that determines what we're going to spend the money on. Ultimately, they have the power of the purse. They appropriate funds to different programs, and they decide where we should spend that money.
Yeah, and I think that is also a kind of an apt point to highlight. It's almost quite fulfilling. I mean, the money where your mouth is, so to speak, when it comes to stuff like that, is this your municipal budget, your annual budget, I should say, is that policy of what this community values, what it's going to spend its money on ultimately for our folks. And one area where I think there might be a little overlap into the private world, where does the city see most of its significant expense? Where is its biggest expenditure?
Well, we're a service organization. Our biggest expense is in people, and that's in salaries and benefits. Just over 66% of the general fund budget is to pay people. We provide services to the residents. We need people to provide those services. We're not building widgets. We're providing services. We're a service-based organization.
Yeah, and to get those services done, to pay those salaries that get our services and programs administered, thinking about financial sustainability, what is the city's largest revenue stream?
Our largest revenue stream currently is property taxes, followed by state shared revenue, state aid. About 66% of the budget is from property tax revenue.
Yeah. So certainly an area of focus when it comes to discussions about financial sustainability and how, at least within the parameters of our state, municipalities have to operate. What does the role of citizens look like in the budgeting process? I know you said that the council ultimately takes on that budget as their own, and they're of course the people's representatives. But how can residents learn more?
Well, I'm certainly by watching good programming like this, they can learn more about the budget process. But we also have study sessions that are publicly noticed where the city council asks questions and dives into the budget. Department division office heads are there to answer those questions. We have residents that do attend those. There's a public hearing on the budget, so residents are encouraged to come out. It's the first meeting in November, which is the 13th this year, where the council will hold a public hearing and get citizen input on the budget. And then certainly just contacting the council, letting them know what's important to residents, contacting the administration, seeing what we can do there. Is always an option for having some impact on the budget.
Yeah, and certainly would encourage folks to take that proactive role because, to most folks it might not seem like the most interesting sort of read through, but as you mentioned, it is, in my mind, the foremost sort of policy document that orients what we're going to prioritize for that coming year. So very important for folks to read, and of course the budget is available online, janesvillewi.gov/2024 budget. Now, Dave, last month, as we said, staff presented the administration's proposed 2024 budget to the council, all together with a general fund, capital, everything. It's about a little over 127.9 million, I should say. I wanted to highlight that the budget was presented with a significant reduction in the amount of what we call required kind of fund balance draw. Could you explain what a fund balance draw is and how the city works to kind of keep that in check? Yeah,
sure. And I mean, the fund balance, Nick, really think about that as like the city's savings account. So we squirrel a little bit of money away, and then we've got money in the savings account for if emergency comes up. We were very fortunate, for example, when COVID hit, that we had the flexibility with our fund balance, with our savings account, to purchase things that we needed to purchase to ensure continuity of government without worrying about if and when we were going to get reimbursed by the state or the federal government in a declared emergency. We were just able to do what our residents needed. So that's what the fund balance is. By law, cities have to have balanced budgets. So our expenses cannot exceed our revenues, but we can use fund balance to fill in the gap if we want to. Last year, we had a significant gap. It was just north of $1 million, and we were able to plug that with fund balance draw so that we would have a balanced budget. So for 2023, we had budgeted to lower our savings account by a little over $1 million. At this point of the year, it doesn't look like we're going to take any of that drawdown through controlling expenditures, over-realizing revenues in some areas. We should have money that we actually add back to our savings account. However, for 2024, we're thinking about a $240,000 fund drawdown. It's about a 76% reduction in the planned drawdown, which was one of the parameters that the City Council set for us, was to get that number lower.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we'll kind of get to sort of the undergirding reality of why those fund balance draws happen. But I think with our past budget performance, I would understand that draw typically doesn't actually even occur. Is that just because of savings throughout the year?
Well, it's generally because of either savings throughout the year or an over-realization of revenues. And in accounting, without getting too technical and too boring, we use a principle called conservatism. So we don't want to say we're going to have $3 million in revenue if we're not. So we might say we're going to have $2.7 million in revenue. $3 million could happen. 2.7 is going to happen. So if we actually hit $3 million in revenue, that's an extra $300,000 we weren't planning on. The same side of conservatism with budgeting on the expenditure side, we think things will cost us a little bit more maybe than they will. Because if we think something's going to cost us $10 and it only costs us $9, that's good for everybody. Because we've properly planned. So historically, I've been with the city for 16 years, and historically we have not drawn down on fund balance for the operating budget. We have made draws on the fund balance very intentionally for capital projects to lower our borrowing. A good example of that is Fire Station 1. We did a fund drawdown to lower the amount of borrowing that we had to do, which has a positive impact on our taxpayers.
And that's another good point to kind of not get too insider baseball, but think about is that the fund balance, we actually don't want it to be too high, right? Because that would the government shouldn't be kind of squirreling away unnecessary amounts of...
And the Government Finance Officers Association, which is kind of the professional organization that our finance office belongs to, their best practice is that a community should have between 16.7 and 25% of budgeted operational expenditures in reserves. So basically that's 2 to 3 months of expenditures in reserves. It really provides you for that flexibility. And the city has stayed within that range the entire time I've been at the city. And I don't see anything that's going to change.
Just prudent practice, and through sort of conservatism in accounting and cost and disciplined budgeting, really, city staff every year are able to, like you say, balance that budget, because that's a necessity here at the local level. We're certainly not the federal government. But if we were able to examine the tough financial reality, what root causes sort of underlie the situation in Janesville? Why, we are so lean when it comes to that revenue?
Well, and on the revenue side, it's really a byproduct of a couple of things. One is that we have levy limits, and it's a hard cap in Wisconsin. Legally, we can increase our levy by net new construction every year. And when I talk to my friends who aren't accountants, who aren't budget people, so it doesn't sound so insider baseball, what I tell them is, compared to other states, Wisconsin's the NFL. We have a hard cap. You have to stay at or under it. Other states, they have levy limits, but it's more like the NBA, where there's a cap, but there's also the Supermax contract you can hand out that doesn't apply to the cap, and we don't have that. The struggle with net new construction is, if you have a $10 million facility that gets built, that sounds great, but when you've got $8 billion worth of value already, it's hardly moving the needle. And that's where we've been every year for at least a decade. with our levy limits being lower than CPI, and I'm not talking about the last couple of years where inflation has been rampant and really bad. I'm talking about even the really lower inflation years of 5, 6, 7 years ago, where inflation was 2.25%, and net new construction was underneath that, and our net new construction was considered booming by the standards of Wisconsin.
Yeah. So we're not even a community necessarily boxed in municipally boundary-wise, or a community that's really stagnant in economic growth. I mean, I think folks can certainly appreciate that if they go around town. But even with that, it sounds like, I mean, every year we're losing buying power.
We're losing buying power. And that's with inflation hovering around 2%. The last couple of years with inflation in excess of 7% has really been a challenge.
Yeah. So it's harder and harder, and that's just because of the way our state has set that system up.
Yes, and it's because of the levy limits.
Yeah, and so that's really a major theme to think about, especially moving forward, because like you said, that's going to hamper us every year from here forward, because I think we're all optimists here, but I don't think the city would ever have a 7% net new construction rate unless something real drastic. It would be a great
problem to have.
It would be an exceptional problem to have, but without changes on that front, I know we did get a little bit of a fix when it comes to shared revenue.
Well, and that's the second piece of it when it comes to our revenue. Really, the theory in Wisconsin for years was local government should be funded like a three-legged stool, and each leg should be equal in the tripod. Property taxes should pay about a third, state shared revenue should pay about a third, and then other revenue, fees, that sort of stuff would pay about a third. And what we've seen happen, and it's not unique to Janesville, but we're certainly getting hit with it, is even with the levy limits, shared revenue has decreased. Our real shared revenue from the state is less today than it was in 2000.
Wow.
And that is after Act 12,
Yeah.
with the increase in state shared revenue, where the state has said, beginning in 2024, we're going to say that 1/5 of the state sales tax will be for local government.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing. The problem is they froze the formula back in 2002 on how they calculated how local governments got funding.
Yeah.
And so we've been very, not just stagnant in that, it's been stagnant, and the states in a couple of different years cut the amount of state shared revenue that they provided to local communities.
Yeah.
With Act 12, they said, well, we're going to make sure that every local community gets at least a 20% increase, which sounds really, really good. Unfortunately, we were starting with such a small number that a 20% increase worked out to be $913,000.
Yeah.
That's great. We're able to do good things with that. We certainly love having that money, but it's not really the equivalent of what we should get. Our neighbors to the south got $3.2 million in increased aid. And again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have gotten that, but that's just the comparison there.
Yeah.
That the city of Beloit got those funds, and we got $913,000. So we got about 25% of what they got. And it's because the underlying formula is broken.
It's just broken. And there's not, how disappointing that in Madison there is not that will to re-examine just a fundamentally illogical sort of flaw that you would lock into place, and certainly not picking on our sister city to the south, but just with that kind of hyper-local context, it's incredible to think that the city of Janesville for almost 2 decades has been punished by this, and our residents have been punished by this.
Well, that's the real is the real thing. You know, when people say, why doesn't the city do this?
Yeah.
Or why don't we do that? It's because we just don't have the funding for it. There are lots of great ideas out there, but we just can't afford to do them.
Yeah.
And it's because we're not getting our fair share from the state. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I'm certainly not saying, I've not heard anybody at the city say that Beloit's getting more than their fair share.
Right.
It's just we're not getting an equal slice of the pie.
Right.
And our slice of the pie got a little bit bigger this year, and that's good, but it's still not where it should be.
Yeah. Yeah. More of a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, in my opinion. And again, certainly not going to argue that we should squirrel away from other communities to fix our inequity, but that formula has to be addressed at some point, because it's certainly not fair to our residents, and largely because of inaction. In Madison, that has just continued, but to sort of reorient perhaps to a more optimistic sort of outlook, what would you say on the flip side would be Janesville's biggest financial advantage moving forward as a municipality?
Well, I think one of the things that we've got strong budgeting practices.
Yeah.
We've got strong reserves. When you've got those two things, you have a lot of flexibility. We can withstand some economic body blows as an organization that other communities might not be able to withstand. Mm-hmm. Again, I think back to 2020 when one day we all went to work and everything was fine, and the next day the state was just kind of closed.
Right.
And because we have a lot of flexibility because of strong budgeting, we were able to ensure that the critical services that our residents depend on were still in place.
Yeah.
Nobody who called for an ambulance got told, sorry, we've got COVID.
Right.
We can't do that anymore. Because we were able to get our paramedics and our firefighters the PPE that they needed mm-hmm. to continue to go out and serve our residents. That's just one example, and it's because of the flexibility that we have. And so I'm convinced that we're going to maintain that, and we're going to maintain the ability to serve the needs of the residents.
Yeah.
We just have to continue to be creative in how we do that and leverage that financial flexibility.
Yeah. It's almost that flip side of that coin. It forged out of the fire, I think, of some of that inequity and just the realities that we've lived with. I hope folks do realize that we are adaptable and flexible when it comes to stretching our finances, and that COVID was a perfect example of how that makes our organization ready to respond.
Yeah, and it's not just our finances piece. I mean, we came up with ideas programmatically in recreation that we had never contemplated before, because we've got talented people that are creative and are problem solvers.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that is very beneficial to our organization.
Yeah, that value of adaptability really shown through the entire organization, and very fortunate to have it. But now, I guess, Dave, as we think about this, so the city administration puts its proposed budget together, the council reviews it, tweaks it as they desire, and makes it their own, and then they adopt it. From that, we get a mill rate, or we set the amount property taxpayers would have to end up paying to support that, the city's operations. But I always like to highlight, as we get up to everybody's favorite time of the year with tax bills, we're not the only line somebody's going to see on their bill. How is a total tax bill sort of come together?
So we all have our part. Tax bills are generated out of the city clerk treasurer's office for the city of Janesville. So when the council adopts the levy and sets the mill rate, I certify that for the city with the city clerk treasurer. That creates the city's line of the tax bill. The city clerk treasurer gets similar certifications from the school district, from Black Hawk Technical College, and from the county. Now, they're slightly different. The city, everybody's in the city. That's the only people that our taxes impact. Yeah. The school district is the entire school district boundaries, and so that can be a lot of communities or a few communities.
Right.
The school district of Janesville has the city, but it also has outlying townships like La Prairie, like Harmony, like the town of Janesville. So we have a proportional share of that based on equalized value. Rock County is obviously the entire county, so they're hitting everybody in the county with their proportional share, whether you live in Milton or Janesville or the town of Turtle or the city of Beloit. And then there's Black Hawk Tech, which hits Rock County and parts of Greene County, so it's really expansive. But everybody has a line there, and they have a proportional share that each community has to pay to that taxing jurisdiction.
Yeah. So it all, while the bill itself kind of originates and comes together once that's certified in the CTO in our city office, we're not the only line there. And depending on if you're on Main Street or if you're on the north side of Janesville, you might see a different school district.
Correct.
On that line that composes it together. And so, depending on the breakdown, the city in 2023, for example, will receive sort of 34 cents out of every dollar collected in property taxes, and then allocates that out to city services. As we talk about municipal finances, I understand that the city also has enterprise funds that sort of are outside of the general fund residents might think of when they think about police or recreation. What are enterprise funds?
Well, enterprise funds are really funds that operate like a business.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the revenue that those funds support, or the revenue that those funds generate supports the expenses associated with those revenues. So really our big enterprise funds are the water utility, the wastewater utility, the stormwater utility, and the landfill.
Yeah.
Those funds charge people, users, for the services that are provided. We all pay for police protection through property taxes, whether we ever call the police or not.
Right.
We all pay for fire protection, whether we have a fire at our home or not. We only have to pay for the water that we use.
Yep.
And that's an enterprise fund. And that fund is designed to generate profitability, to ensure the long-term success and continuation of the service.
Yeah.
I like to talk a lot about the water utility because it's certainly an issue that's near and dear to folks, because everybody is getting a water bill.
Yes.
As part of their municipal utility bill. Water is one line of that. And people often ask why water costs what it costs. Well, we have to pump that water out of the ground.
Yeah.
And we've got to treat it to make sure that it's potable.
Yeah.
And we need to have the infrastructure to deliver that water, which is hundreds of miles of water mains. If a water main breaks, people want to have water. We take for granted that when we turn the faucet on, we've got clean water that comes out of there. But wait till you have a water main break in your neighborhood and you turn the faucet on and there's no water. It becomes a lot more important to you.
Yeah.
And we don't want to end up like certain communities in Michigan, where we found out that they were taking shortcuts in the the treatment of their water and the pumping of their water, and it was causing their residents to be very ill.
Yeah.
And so we want to have a long, sustainable fund. We want to have a business that operates, and it's operated for over 100 years, and we want it to continue to operate for the next 100 years with no problems, so that we can have good, safe, clean water.
Yeah, yeah. So it recognizes the capital, or the money that's needed to ensure its sustainability, and that responsibility we have as a community to make sure our children, our children's children, have safe and clean drinking water, which is, as foundational to life, I think, as any of our services can come. And again, when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong, as you allude to with other communities. And so very important people think about that. And also important that folks, when it comes to water, kind of recognize, like you said, when it comes to things like fee collection and recovery, water is something that rate is overseen by the Public Service Commission.
Overseen by the Public Service Commission, yes. And so the Public Service Commission actually, for the water utility itself, sets the rates.
Yeah, yes.
And is in charge of that. But so there is not just a couple of city employees sitting in a back room somewhere saying, this is what we think we should charge for water. And we'd like to do those things out in the open, but the idea is that we're providing a quality product, and in this case, we're providing a product to people. Yeah. With the general fund, it's a service. With water, that's a product. Yeah. And we try to provide that at the best rate possible to the ratepayers.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very important to think about, and I would encourage folks to take a moment when they turn their tap on and just think about the process that goes into getting that to them. And the other distinction, perhaps, I just want to quick highlight in the world of finance is operating expenses versus capital expenses. Mm-hmm. And so again, when we talk about those services you get and your tax bill comes every year, you think more of operating expenses. How is a capital project defined, and how are those funded?
Well, really, capital project is defined as an item that's going to provide more than 12 months of value, 12 months of service. And if you want to, a great way to think about it, a police officer who's driving in a squad car, the police officer is an operating expense. Yeah. The squad car is a capital expense. Right. We expect to have that for multiple years and for it to have what we call an accounting economic value for multiple years. And so we really fund our capital program through a variety of ways. Some of it is borrowing. Mm-hmm. We borrow money on the in the general market in an effort to pay for those products and then pay for it over time. This would be very similar to a car loan that you or I would personally get. We also will use some operating funds to make a purchase. And when I think about that, in the car loan example, that might be the down payment piece for a new car. I think one of the things we do a really good job of is trying to find grants and other sources of money for stuff. Mm-hmm. So you'll hear that a capital project has been funded by the state DOT. Right. Milwaukee Street, that was a big DOT project. That was great. The city still had to contribute money to that, but the state contributed more money, so we're getting more bang for our taxpayers' buck. And so those are really some of the big sources of financing of capital equipment, whereas really our operating and those expenses, those are funded really through those three things I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Taxes, state shared revenues, or fees for service. Yeah. And so depending upon what that operating expenditure is, would kind of say what bucket of money it came out of.
Yeah, and as you say, staff are certainly prudent when it comes to maximizing funds outside of our own property ratepayers dollar when it comes to those capital projects. But also when you think about it, I like that car loan down payment example, but certainly where it's fiscally prudent to pay what you can up front, but then also recognizing that value sort of long term to that infrastructure and spreading out the costs kind of appropriately.
And we certainly we look where we can to lower our borrowing and cash finance things.
Yeah.
Just like if you cannot pay interest
Yeah.
on a car loan, it oftentimes doesn't make sense to, particularly in the current rate environment.
Right.
And so we'll try to pay cash for things that we can pay cash for. Ideally, as a finance guy and a finance director, I'd like to pay cash for everything and not borrow any money.
Right.
But that's not realistic. When you talk about a large building project, something like Fire Station 1 years ago when we built that, it made sense to borrow money for that. That's a building that's going to be there for 50 years.
Yeah.
So there are times where it makes sense to borrow money, and so we certainly try to make sure that we're doing that in the most fiscally responsible way possible to have the lowest impact on our taxpayers that we can.
Yeah, and we certainly do that judiciously and sort of again creatively to the point where we do get creative when it comes to making things happen. And Dave, after all of those components and sort of distinctions, we do arrive at a budget. Hard to believe, but we do. And if members of the public, as we wrap up, Dave, want to dig a little deeper into our budget or the city's finances in general, I know we talked about our budget being online, but then you maybe also said a comprehensive report and some other resources.
Yeah, we also have the annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR. That's our annual audit. That is where a third-party auditor comes in and they review and test our transactions and ensure that we're following policies and that we document our procedures. And then they provide a letter saying where they believe we are. We had what's called an unqualified opinion this past year and have for several years, which is the highest level of assurance that the auditors can have that our financial statements are materially correct. Those are all available online. If you go to JATVMedia.gov and click on the finance office, you can find those for the last several years. We also monthly issue interim financial statements to the City Council. It's typically the second meeting of the month.
Yep.
At the beginning of the year, there's a little bit of a delay because we're doing year-end stuff.
Right.
But you can see those. You can go through those. They come with what I believe is an engrossing memo.
Yes.
I write that, so I might have a little bias, but there's a memo that talks about what's occurring in our financial statements. As far as the proposed 2024 budget, a copy of that's available at both the Clerk Treasurer's office in print form and at Hedberg Public Library in print form if folks want to sit down and peruse that. And as you mentioned, it's also online.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways to be engaged with our finances and where we're at as a community.
Yeah. Certainly not a lack of information. And, what I would say is if folks do poke around and as questions certainly arise, there are always resources. They could always come to a council meeting or give you folks a call. And you're happy to discuss it, I'm sure.
Not everybody finds budgeting and annual financial reports exciting, but the folks in the finance office certainly do.
Yes.
We live for this sort of stuff, so this is a fun time of year for us.
Fun time of year, and we're certainly happy to have you, Dave. And that just about does it for us today on the program. I want to not only thank you for joining us, but for all you and your team in the finance office do to ensure that the city not only has the resources it needs to carry out the essential services we provide, but also do it in a way that is responsible and as efficient as possible for our taxpayers. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
And I want to thank you, our viewers and residents, for tuning in today and for all you do to help make Janesville a community of choice to realize life's opportunities. I invite you to stay connected with the city by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, registering to receive emergency notifications from the JPD via the Nixle app, and signing up to receive our weekly city press releases by visiting www.janesvillewi.gov/email list. For Park Place Views in the city of Janesville, I'm Nick Faust. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next month.